By the autumn of 1939, the Atlantic was already shaping into a deadly chessboard. The war had begun, and the German Kriegsmarine's U-boats were poised to strike at the heart of Britain's lifeline, merchant convoys. Germany had anticipated a short war, but the reality quickly demanded prolonged naval dominance. Submarines, small, silent, and lethal, became the spearhead of the strategy. Early U-boat operations relied on stealth and surprise. German naval doctrine, shaped by Admiral Karl Dönitz, emphasized the wolf pack tactic. Small submarines would patrol independently, then converge to attack convoys at night, overwhelming escorts with coordinated strikes. U-boat crews were trained to operate in tight secrecy. Inside the steel hull, the atmosphere was tense but disciplined. Every man had a precise role. The air was heavy with diesel fumes, and the vibrations of engines were a constant reminder of the fragile line between life and death. The U-boat's first successes were striking. Convoys moving from North America to Britain were slow, vulnerable, and lightly defended. Between 1939 and early 1940, U-boats sank hundreds of thousands of tons of Allied shipping, striking fear into the Atlantic. For the crews, these early victories reinforced a sense of near invincibility. Captains like Kretschmer, and Schepke became legends, their names whispered with respect and awe within the Kriegsmarine. Yet the Allies were not idle. Britain, reliant on imported food, raw materials, and fuel, rapidly adapted. Convoys, once easy targets, began to travel under armed escort, often including destroyers, corvettes, and armed trawlers. These escorts were equipped with depth charges capable of detonating at preset depths, turning the ocean into a lethal grid for submerged U-boats. Initially, detection remained a challenge. U-boats were difficult to spot, and attacks often relied on visual sightings at night or during poor weather. The human dimension was relentless. Life aboard a U-boat was a constant struggle against monotony, claustrophobia, and fear. Crewmen spent weeks in near-total darkness, eating cold rations, sleeping in shifts. Stress accumulated silently, a psychological pressure compounded by the knowledge that the next convoy could be their last. Many captains trusted in the U-boat's stealth above all, relying on the assumption that beneath the waves they were untouchable. By late 1940, however, small signs indicated a shift. Convoys were no longer as vulnerable. Escorts began experimenting with new technologies. Radar, initially crude, could detect U-boat periscopes in some conditions. Radio direction finding allowed Allied forces to trace transmissions, pinpointing submarine positions with growing accuracy. Intelligence breakthroughs, most notably the decoding of Enigma messages at Bletchley Park, revealed the positions of wolf packs, allowing convoys to reroute and evade ambushes. The Kriegsmarine, confident yet cautious, continued to push U-boat operations deeper into the Atlantic. Their objective was clear: strangle Britain's supply lines before winter and force the island nation to negotiate. Each patrol was a calculated risk, balancing aggressive attack with the ever-present danger of detection. For the crews, the Atlantic was a silent predator, but they believed they were the hunters, invisible and untouchable beneath the waves. Yet the stage was quietly being set for a confrontation that would challenge this perception. Allied engineers had developed a new kind of weapon, one that did not rely on sight or chance. It relied on sound. ASDIC, the precursor to modern sonar, would allow destroyers to see beneath the surface, transforming the ocean from a U-boat sanctuary into a monitored, lethal battlefield. By the time the first sonar-equipped escorts began patrolling the North Atlantic, the war beneath the waves had entered a new era. The days when a U-boat could slip through darkness and fog with impunity were numbered. A technological shadow was spreading across the ocean, and the hunters were about to realize that they were being hunted in return. The Atlantic, once a theater of stealth, was changing. And when the first sonar ping resonated through the hulls of German U-boats, it would shatter the illusion of invisibility that had defined the early months of the conflict. The last sentence naturally leads to Context Section 2, which will cover the development of Allied ASW technology and early encounters with sonar-equipped escorts. By 1941, the Allies had begun to harness technology in ways that would redefine naval warfare. Central among these innovations was ASDIC, an early form of sonar. Developed in the late 1920s and refined through the 1930s, ASDIC emitted sound waves into the water. When these waves struck a submerged object, they bounced back, revealing the presence and distance of a U-boat. For the first time, Allied escorts could actively locate submarines rather than relying solely on sight, luck, or intercepted communications. The introduction of sonar coincided with a broader transformation in anti-submarine warfare, ASW. Destroyers and corvettes were fitted with improved depth-charge projectors, enabling attacks from multiple angles. Radar allowed surface vessels to detect periscopes or snorkels above water, while radio direction finding, or HUF-DUF, could trace the source of U-boat transmissions across vast distances. Combined, these technologies made the ocean a monitored and dangerous environment for German submarines. The human element was equally critical. Allied sonar operators required extensive training to interpret echoes and distinguish between fish, debris, and enemy vessels. Crews on escort ships worked in shifts, listening intently for the faint, rhythmic pings that could signal a lurking U-boat. These operators became the hunters in a war that had previously favored stealth and invisibility. Early encounters between U-boats and sonar-equipped escorts revealed the effectiveness of the technology and its psychological impact. Reports from German captains described the first moments when sonar contact was made. A sudden awareness of detection, followed by tense evasive maneuvers. Depth charges exploded nearby, sending tremors through the hull, rattling machinery and testing nerves. U-boat crews, long accustomed to prowling unseen, were confronted with a new reality. The ocean was no longer a safe haven. Allied intelligence also played a decisive role. The cracking of Enigma codes at Bletchley Park provided precise U-boat positions, enabling escorts to patrol strategically. Wolfpack tactics, once a formidable threat, began to falter under coordinated countermeasures. Convoys were rerouted, ambushes foiled, and losses inflicted on U-boats increased. The shift was gradual but unmistakable. U-boat captains reported that attacks once executed with confidence now carried higher risk. Every ping from the ocean above reminded crews that their previous invisibility was an illusion. The Atlantic, vast and dark, had become an arena of tension and constant threat. For German crews, the change was existential. Submarines were confined spaces. Stress, claustrophobia, and fear were constant companions. The awareness that sonar could pinpoint their location altered behavior. Depths previously considered safe were now dangerous. Surfacing to recharge batteries or communicate risked immediate detection, each patrol carried the weight of uncertainty, and every encounter with an Allied escort became a test of nerves and skill. By mid-1941, sonar had moved from experimental technology to a cornerstone of Allied strategy. The psychological impact on U-boat crews, fear, hypervigilance, and a sense of vulnerability, was as significant as the technological advantage itself. Wolfpack attacks continued, but the ocean no longer belonged unchallenged to the hunter. And then came the pivotal moment. Beneath the waves, a U-boat would hear the unmistakable hum of sonar for the first time. In that instant, a hunter became aware of being hunted. The North Atlantic, long a theater of stealth and deadly opportunity for German submarines, was transforming into a lethal arena where sound, rather than darkness, dictated survival. The last line naturally leads to the angles section, exploring human tactical, technological, and strategic perspectives of this turning point. Life aboard a U-boat was a relentless test of endurance. The crew, often no more than 40 men, lived in close quarters where silence was both a necessity and a source of tension. Diesel fumes mixed with the metallic tang of the hull, creating an atmosphere that never allowed the mind to fully relax. Sleep came in fragmented shifts, with some men catching only an hour at a time. The introduction of sonar added an invisible layer of stress. Every faint thrum or echoing ping was interpreted as imminent danger. Captain Kretschmer and his peers reported that the psychological impact was profound. Sailors who had once moved confidently in darkness now flinched at every vibration. Conversations grew terse, nerves frayed under the constant anticipation of detection. The fear of depth charges exploding nearby created a mental strain that was as lethal as the weapon itself. The very act of diving, previously a standard procedure, became a tense gamble. Human endurance was tested not only by physical confinement, but by the knowledge that the ocean had acquired a new, unseen eye. Tactically, sonar forced U-boat commanders to rethink established strategies. The Wolfpack, once a near-invincible formation, became vulnerable to coordinated Allied countermeasures. Escorts could now detect submerged submarines from a distance, forcing U-boats to attack more cautiously. Nighttime surfaced attacks, long a staple of German tactics, became far riskier. Submarines had to dive earlier, often losing optimal firing positions. Convoy routing also evolved. Allied forces began to deploy hunter-killer groups, small squadrons of escorts specifically trained to track and eliminate detected submarines. Tactics that had relied on surprise were now countered by a combination of sonar, depth charges, and coordinated movement. U-boat captains had to choose between aggression and survival, constantly weighing the risk of exposure against the potential success of an attack. In this environment, miscalculations were fatal, and tactical improvisation became essential. At the heart of this transformation was ASDIC, the first practical sonar system. Unlike visual detection, sonar could locate submarines in total darkness and under poor weather conditions. Operators aboard Allied destroyers sent pulses of sound into the ocean. When these pulses reflected off a submerged hull, the return echo provided precise information about the U-boat's distance and, in some cases, its speed and depth. The technology was far from infallible. Early systems had blind spots and could be deceived by thermoclines, layers of varying water temperature that bent sound waves. Nevertheless, the advantages were decisive. Sonar allowed escort ships to maintain contact while closing in on submarines, coordinating depth charge attacks with a deadly precision previously impossible. For U-boat crews encountering a sonar-equipped escort was like facing an invisible predator that could suddenly see them in the pitch-black depths of the Atlantic. The technological edge was complemented by intelligence breakthroughs. Enigma decrypts informed convoy routes while radio direction finding narrowed the search area. The combination of sonar, intelligence, and skilled operators transformed the Atlantic from a hunter's paradise into a monitored battlefield, where every U-boat movement was potentially observable. At the helm of the Kriegsmarine, Admiral Karl Dönitz faced a growing dilemma. The very tactics that had secured early victories, the Wolfpack and aggressive night surface attacks, were increasingly vulnerable to Allied detection. Dönitz emphasized strict operational discipline, instructing U-boat commanders to avoid unnecessary transmissions and to maintain radio silence whenever possible. Patrol patterns were adjusted, and commanders were reminded that survival now demanded more caution than ambition. Dönitz also grappled with the human cost of this technological shift. Reports from the front lines highlighted frayed nerves, panic during depth charge attacks, and the psychological strain of facing sonar-equipped escorts. Leadership required not only strategic insight, but an understanding of human endurance. Orders increasingly reflected a balance between offensive action and preservation of the crew, a nuanced approach, in a war that had become as much about surviving detection as sinking enemy. Ships from the Allied perspective, destroyer and corvette captains quickly adapted to the sonar advantage. Their role evolved from passive convoy protection to active submarine hunting. Patrols were coordinated in patterns designed to maximize coverage, and sonar operators became critical decision-makers. Every ping could trigger an immediate depth charge attack, forcing U-boats to dive deeper, often into layers of water that made navigation and torpedo firing more difficult. Allied escort groups relied on teamwork and layered defense. Multiple ships could triangulate a submarine's position, while aircraft provided additional overhead surveillance. The combination of sonar, intelligence from decoded communications, and coordinated tactics created a near-constant threat to any submerged U-boat. For the Allies, the technological and human elements worked together seamlessly, turning the once invisible hunters into detectable targets. The introduction of sonar and the subsequent increase in U-boat losses had profound strategic consequences. German submarines had been central to the plan of starving Britain into submission. Now every patrol carried the risk of detection and destruction, threatening the long-term viability of the Wolfpack strategy. Survival became as important as aggression, and German officers were forced to reconsider the moral and operational calculus of their orders. For the Allies, the moral dimension was equally significant. Every detected U-boat not only prevented the loss of critical supplies, but also shifted the psychological balance of the Atlantic campaign. Convoy crews gained confidence, Knowing that submarines were no longer invincible, sonar reinforced the notion that technological innovation could directly save lives and influence the outcome of war. The strategic landscape had irrevocably changed. German commanders could no longer rely solely on stealth and surprise. Allied escorts empowered by sonar and intelligence had leveled the playing field. The hunter had become the hunted, and every decision beneath the waves now carried both tactical and existential weight. The realization that U-boats were no longer invisible set the stage for decisive encounters, moments when the tension between hunter and hunted would erupt in violent confrontation. These battles would mark the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, illustrating how technology, human endurance, and leadership collided beneath the waves. March 1941. The North Atlantic was a vast expanse of gray water, swollen with winter storms. U-99, commanded by Otto Kretschmer, patrolled near the southern edge of Iceland's shipping lanes. The crew had grown tense over weeks of patrols, yet confidence remained, an invisible hunter gliding through darkness. That confidence would soon collide with the relentless precision of Allied sonar. On the evening of March 17th, U-99 spotted a convoy, 5 merchant vessels escorted by 3 British destroyers. Kretschmer ordered a submerged approach, confident that stealth would secure an easy strike. Below, the diesel engines were silent, the only sounds the creaking hull and the occasional shuffle of boots. Then faintly a ping. The sonar pulse from a destroyer, subtle, almost imperceptible, reached the hull. The crew froze. The sound, a mechanical heartbeat, was foreign and menacing. Kretschmer realized instantly that the enemy knew his presence. Orders were shouted in low, urgent tones. The submarine adjusted depth and angle, attempting evasive maneuvers. But the sonar allowed the destroyers to track the U-boat with unprecedented accuracy. Depth charges exploded nearby, sending violent tremors through the hull. Crewmen clutched rails, hearts pounding. Machinery rattled as water seeped through joints loosened by the concussive force. Kretschmer's tactical mind raced. The attack required a balance between aggression and survival. He ordered a temporary retreat, a maneuver that would have been unnecessary just months earlier. Yet retreat offered no guarantee. Sonar operators could predict movement and maintain contact, forcing U-99 into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Across the Atlantic, similar encounters were unfolding. U-100, under the command of Joachim Schepke, engaged another convoy near Rockall. Once submerged, the U-boat was tracked by sonar for over 2 hours. Each ping reduced the margin of error, and every depth charge attack tested the crew's nerve. Schepke's log described the sensation vividly. The sea itself has become our enemy. Every sound could signal our end. The technological shift was stark. Previously, U-boats had relied on darkness, weather, and maneuvering to remain hidden. Now the ocean itself carried the enemy's eye. The hunter had become the hunted. Sonar, combined with depth charges, forced U-boat commanders into defensive tactics that slowed attacks and reduced effectiveness. Wolf-pack formations, once coordinated for maximum destruction, were now vulnerable to detection and preemptive engagement. At sea, human endurance was stretched to the limit. Crewmen spent hours in near-total silence, listening for sonar pings, feeling the pressure of depth changes, and awaiting the telltale vibrations of depth charges detonating nearby. Panic could not be shown, yet fear was palpable. The mental strain, compounded by the knowledge that detection often meant death, tested every sailor aboard these steel coffins. Kretschmer, Schepke, and their peers faced a new reality. Survival depended as much on skillful evasion as on tactical aggression. Engagements became high-stakes gambles. A single miscalculation, an incorrect depth adjustment, a mistimed turn, or even a delayed observation could result in catastrophic loss. The psychological weight of sonar detection changed the very nature of naval combat in the Atlantic. This period marked the first decisive moments where sonar demonstrated its full potential. Not as a theoretical innovation, but as an operational reality, it reshaped encounters between U-boats and Allied convoys. Each ping resonated through hulls like a warning, a heartbeat reminding crews that beneath the waves, they were no longer ghosts but visible targets. The realization spread among the Kriegsmarine. Invisibility. Their greatest advantage had been compromised. Every patrol carried a hidden danger, every approach a calculated risk. And for the Allies, These encounters confirmed that technology, training, and intelligence could decisively counter the previously dominant U-boat threat. The stage was set for a series of battles that would define the Atlantic War. Confrontations where sonar detection, tactical innovation, and human endurance collided violently beneath the ocean's surface. The war beneath the waves was entering a new, unforgiving phase, one that would test both the resolve of U-boat crews and the effectiveness of Allied anti-submarine strategy. April 1941. In the storm-lashed North Atlantic, U-boats prowled beneath the waves with increasing caution. The wolfpack tactics that had once instilled fear in Allied convoys were now shadowed by uncertainty. The wolfpack tactics that had once instilled fear in Allied convoys were now shadowed by uncertainty. The moment of invisibility lost had arrived, and it struck with relentless clarity. U-100, under Joachim Schepke, engaged a convoy south of Iceland. As the submarine submerged, the faint yet unmistakable pings of sonar cut through the darkness. Schepke had trained his crew to react swiftly, to evade detection. Yet each pulse from the destroyer above reduced their options. Depth charges detonated with terrifying proximity, shaking the hull and rattling instruments. The U-boat's steel walls groaned under pressure, and water seeped through tiny seams, a chilling reminder of vulnerability. The realization was immediate. The Atlantic was no longer a safe hunting ground. U-boats that had previously maneuvered freely now faced a system designed to locate and destroy them with mechanical precision. The hunter had become the hunted, and for the first time, the psychological dominance of the German submarine fleet was under siege. Kretschmer, Schepke, and their peers adjusted their patrols, emphasizing survival over audacity. Night attacks were limited. Radio silence became sacrosanct. Each decision was measured against the invisible, yet omnipresent eyes of Allied sonar operators. The consequences were evident across the theater. Allied reports from sonar-equipped destroyers revealed a growing pattern. U-boats were evading less frequently, abandoning attacks, or retreating at the first indication of detection. Convoys, once vulnerable, traveled with increased confidence. The combined effects of sonar, intelligence from Enigma decrypts, and improved escort coordination began to tilt the Battle of the Atlantic decisively. The strategic implications for Dönitz were profound. In wartime briefings, he acknowledged that U-boat losses had escalated not solely due to numbers or skill, but because of technological superiority in detection. The submarine, once considered a near-invincible weapon, now faced a new reality. Invisibility could no longer be assumed. Orders shifted accordingly. Wolfpacks were directed to operate with more dispersion. Patrol areas were modified to reduce predictability. Engagements were calculated with the understanding that a single misstep could be fatal. Human endurance, too, reached its limits. Crews endured hours of nerve-wracking tension, listening for sonar pings, monitoring depth gauges, and preparing for inevitable counterattacks. The psychological toll mirrored the physical strain of operating in confined, cold, and humid conditions. Reports from U-boat logs describe fear becoming a constant companion, altering behavior and eroding the confidence that had defined the early months of the war. Allied forces, conversely, gained a new momentum. Sonar operators became pivotal figures, turning the tide of engagements. Commanders coordinated attacks based on precise sonar readings. Depth charges detonated with accuracy, and convoys increasingly reached ports unscathed. The North Atlantic, once dominated by German stealth, now reflected a technological and tactical parity that forced both sides into a deadly equilibrium. The invisibility lost moment also accelerated German innovation. The Kriegsmarine began exploring countermeasures: acoustic torpedoes designed to home in on sonar signals, snorkels to allow submerged diesel operation, and new evasive tactics. Yet these measures were reactive. The psychological and operational edge had shifted irreversibly. In retrospect, these encounters marked the Atlantic's transformation. Sonar had altered the rules of engagement, turning the ocean from a concealed battlefield into a monitored arena, where human skill, endurance, and technological advantage intertwined. Each detected U-boat represented both a tactical victory and a symbolic shift. The era of unchallenged submarine dominance had ended. By late 1941, The Atlantic was no longer an expanse where German submarines moved unseen. Every pulse of sonar reminded crews that stealth was no longer guaranteed, that survival depended on vigilance, skill, and adaptation. The hunter had been hunted, and in the echo of each sonar ping, the Kriegsmarine confronted the stark reality of the new naval war beneath the waves. By mid-1941, the consequences of sonar-equipped escorts and enhanced Allied anti-submarine tactics were becoming undeniable. U-boat losses increased steadily, a stark measure of the shift beneath the waves. German records confirmed that submarines were being sunk at unprecedented rates, entire patrols wiped out, crews lost to the cold, relentless Atlantic. For the Kriegsmarine, the early months of dominance had given way to an era where survival was no longer assumed, but fiercely contested. Reports from U-99 and U-100 highlight the human toll. Crews endured prolonged exposure to fear and physical stress. The psychological strain of hearing sonar pings echo through the hull, coupled with the violent concussions of nearby depth charges, left lasting marks on those who survived. Logs recount moments of near panic, tension so thick it was almost tangible, and relief tempered by the knowledge that each patrol could be their last. The sense of invincibility that had driven Wolfpack operations was shattered, replaced by a calculated defensive mindset. Strategically, the impact was immediate. The Allies, by combining sonar, intelligence from Enigma decrypts, and improved convoy coordination, began to reduce shipping losses. Convoys moved with greater safety, maintaining the lifeline that sustained Britain's war effort. Reports from British Admiralty officers praised the effectiveness of sonar-equipped destroyers, noting that submarines could now be tracked with increasing precision and often neutralized before they could strike. The Kriegsmarine responded by adjusting operational tactics. Patrol routes were altered to avoid predictable patterns. Wolfpacks dispersed over wider areas, attempting to reduce detection risks. Submarines remained submerged for longer periods, often sacrificing offensive opportunity for the chance of survival. Yet even these adaptations had limits. Allied technological advantages, coupled with experienced sonar operators, meant that each U-boat faced a persistent threat. The human dimension intertwined with strategy. U-boat crews were forced to make decisions under extreme duress, balancing aggression with caution. Every maneuver had consequences, and the psychological pressure amplified the dangers inherent in submarine warfare. Reports from surviving captains reflect a new grim awareness. The ocean was no longer a domain they could dominate at will. Sonar had shifted the balance, turning an environment that once favored stealth into one dominated by detection. The cumulative effect of these encounters reshaped the Battle of the Atlantic. The Allies gained not only a tactical advantage but a morale boost, reinforcing confidence in their ability to protect vital supply lines. German losses, by contrast, eroded morale and forced a reevaluation of strategy. While technological innovation continued on both sides, the immediate impact of sonar was clear. The perception of U-boat invincibility was gone, replaced by a precarious struggle for survival beneath the unforgiving Atlantic waves. By late 1941, the cumulative effects of sonar and improved Allied anti-submarine measures were evident across the Atlantic. U-boat operations faced a new reality. The ocean that had once allowed German submarines to strike with near impunity had become a monitored battlefield. Every patrol carried the risk of detection, and survival often depended on evasion rather than attack. Lost statistics underscore the dramatic shift. Between January and December 1941, over 200 U-boats were sunk or severely damaged, a significant increase from previous years. Thousands of crew members perished, and survivors reported heightened psychological strain. Captains described the haunting persistence of sonar pings, echoing through the hull like a mechanical heartbeat that reminded them of their vulnerability. Submerged for hours on end, crews endured claustrophobia, exhaustion, and the ever-present threat of destruction. Even seasoned veterans acknowledged that the ocean was no longer a space they could dominate. The strategic consequences were profound. The Allies' ability to detect and engage U-boats curtailed the effectiveness of Wolfpack attacks, reducing merchant ship losses and sustaining vital supply lines to Britain. Convoy routes, once heavily targeted, became safer as escorts coordinated tactics informed by intelligence and sonar tracking. This technological advantage allowed the Allies to maintain the lifeline necessary for sustaining war production, civilian food supply, and military operations, effectively turning the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic. German naval leadership responded with both tactical and technological innovations. Snorkels allowed submarines to run diesel engines while submerged, reducing the need to surface and risk detection. Acoustic torpedoes were developed to counter sonar-guided attacks. Patrol strategies shifted toward dispersion, avoiding predictable routes and timings. Yet despite these adaptations, the balance had shifted irrevocably. Allied sonar, combined with intelligence and coordinated escort tactics, maintained the upper hand in submarine detection and neutralization. The human element remained critical. Survivors' accounts described the lasting psychological impact of prolonged sonar encounters, constant tension, heightened alertness, and the gnawing knowledge that any mistake could be fatal. The introduction of sonar transformed not only naval tactics but also the lived experience of submarine warfare. U-boat crews were forced into a perpetual cycle of vigilance and evasive maneuvering, redefining what it meant to operate beneath the waves. By the end of 1941, the invisibility lost moment had fully reshaped the Atlantic theater. Sonar and its allied technologies had not only reduced U-boat effectiveness, but also forced a fundamental shift in strategy, leadership, and morale. The Atlantic was no longer the quiet, shadowed hunting ground it had once been. It had become a domain defined by detection, risk, and the interplay of human skill and technological innovation. This transformation would resonate throughout the war. German commanders recalibrated expectations, while Allied forces gained confidence in their ability to safeguard critical supply routes. The stage was set for a protracted struggle in which sonar, intelligence, and human endurance would continue to shape the outcome beneath the waves. The echo of each sonar ping served as both warning and signal. The rules of submarine warfare had changed forever. The sonar ping that reverberated through the steel hulls of U-boats in 1941 was more than a signal of detection. It was a herald of change. For decades, submarines had prowled the oceans with the promise of invisibility, a silent power beneath waves that shielded men and machines alike. That illusion was shattered, replaced by a stark reality. Technology could pierce the darkness, and survival depended on adaptation, vigilance, and courage. The impact of this shift extended beyond immediate tactics. Sonar forced a recalibration of strategy, leadership, and morale. Wolfpack attacks, once emblematic of German dominance, were tempered by caution. Commanders weighed each maneuver against the possibility of discovery. Crews endured the dual pressures of human vulnerability and mechanical precision. Every sonar echo was a reminder of mortality, of the fragile line between hunter and hunted. For the Allies, the integration of sonar represented a triumph of innovation, intelligence, and coordination. It transformed defensive escorts into proactive hunters, safeguarding vital convoys and preserving the lifelines of nations at war. Technology became not only a tool but a force multiplier, amplifying human skill and altering the psychological landscape of the Atlantic. Beyond the war itself, these encounters left an enduring legacy. Modern naval warfare, submarine design, and anti-submarine tactics are all rooted in the lessons learned beneath the waves during those critical months. Sonar, initially a response to immediate necessity, became a defining element of maritime conflict, shaping doctrines, strategies, and the very perception of underwater combat. Yet, amid the machines and tactics, the human story remains central. The fear, endurance, and determination of U-boat crews, pressed into silence and shadow, remind us that war is not only fought with weapons, but with the minds and hearts of those who endure it. In the echo of each sonar ping, history recorded a turning point, not merely in technology but in the understanding of vulnerability, resilience, and the ever-shifting balance between predator and prey beneath the unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic. The ocean, once a sanctuary for the invisible, had become a theater of revelation. And in that revelation, the war beneath the waves had been irrevocably transformed.